The young woman walked down the crowded streets of the city, her stomach tightening with hunger and her feet aching from hours of walking. She had nothing more than a small worn backpack and an old coat that had seen better days. The winter wind cut through the streets, and she hugged herself tightly, trying to keep warm. Every corner seemed to offer something she could not afford: cafes, filled with the aroma of fresh bread and coffee, people walking with bags full of groceries, and store windows glowing with things she could only dream of. She had learned to ignore the pangs of jealousy and focus on survival, but it was not easy. Hunger was a constant companion. She wandered until she found a small cafe tucked between two taller buildings, a place that seemed quieter than the bustling streets outside. The sign outside was simple, almost unnoticeable, and the windows were fogged from the warmth inside. She peeked in and saw a few people sitting with their drinks, some reading, some talking quietly. And there, in the corner, was an old piano, its wood scratched and keys slightly yellowed with age. The sight of it made her heart skip. It had been years since she played in a place like this, and yet the memory of her hands on keys came rushing back. She hesitated at the door, unsure if she could do it, unsure if anyone would even notice her. But hunger pushed her forward. She stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling softly, and her eyes scanned the room. The cafe owner, a middle-aged man with a kind but tired face, glanced up from behind the counter. She swallowed hard and walked over to him. "I can play," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the hum of conversation. "For a meal, if that's possible." The man looked at her carefully, sizing her up. He could see she was young, perhaps barely out of her teens, and the clothes she wore were old and worn. Her hands were small, and she held them as if they carried some invisible weight. There was something in her eyes, though, something that made him pause. Without a word, he nodded toward the piano. "All right. One meal," he said, gesturing to the corner where the instrument stood. Her heart leapt. She moved toward the piano with careful steps, unsure if she would remember the music that once came so naturally to her. Sitting down on the wooden bench, she glanced around at the few customers who paid her little attention. They were lost in their own worlds, reading, typing on laptops, or chatting softly. She was invisible to them, and perhaps that was best. She didn't want an audience. She just wanted food, warmth, and a moment to breathe. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and let her hands remember what her mind had almost forgotten. The first notes were tentative, cautious, like someone stepping into cold water for the first time. But as the music continued, the sound grew more confident, more fluid. Her fingers moved with a grace that surprised even her. The notes filled the small cafe, soft and steady, blending with the hum of conversation and the clinking of cups. She did not play for applause or recognition. She played to survive, to earn a simple meal that would stop the gnawing pain in her stomach. And yet, even as she played, a small spark of joy returned to her heart. It had been so long since she felt the music in this way, since she let it flow freely without the weight of expectation pressing on her shoulders. The customers hardly noticed her at first. Some glanced briefly, others kept their eyes on their books or screens, but gradually a few heads turned. The music was different from the background noise they were used to. It was not just notes played mechanically, but a melody that carried feeling, a story that wove itself through the air. They could not name it or explain why it held them, but they felt it nonetheless. And still, she remained unaware. She was lost in the music, lost in the moment, thinking only of the meal she would earn, the warmth she would feel, and the brief relief from the harsh reality of the streets. The piano itself was old, with keys that stuck slightly and pedals that squeaked, but it did not matter. She coaxed music from it as if it were an old friend, forgiving its flaws and finding beauty in its imperfections. Each note seemed to carry a piece of her story, of struggles of longing, of hope that she'd almost forgotten. She played for herself as much as for anyone else, letting the sound become an extension of her emotions, a voice for feelings that had no words. Time passed, though she did not notice it. The cafe grew busier as the day went on, people coming and going, yet the music remained a constant presence. The aroma of coffee and baked goods mixed with the sound of her playing, creating a moment that felt suspended from the rest of the world. She played with precision, with care, yet also with a rawness that made the music human, tangible, alive. Every chord struck a balance between delicacy and strength, between vulnerability and courage. When she finally stopped, it was not because anyone told her to, but because her fingers ached and her mind whispered that she had done enough for now. She looked up and noticed the cafe owner watching her, a small plate of food in his hands. He placed it in front of her wordlessly. She thanked him softly, her voice almost a whisper, and dug in. The food was simple, but to her it was a feast. Each bite was a reminder that she had survived another day, that she had claimed a small victory in a life that often gave her a little dot as she ate. She noticed a few customers looking at her differently. Some eyes held curiosity, others a quiet admiration, but she did not yet understand it. She was used to being overlooked, to being invisible, and she had grown accustomed to it. Still, there was something in the air, a subtle shift that she could not name. Perhaps it was the music. Perhaps it was something in the way she carried herself. A quiet dignity that could not be erased by poverty or circumstance. The young woman left the cafe that day with a full stomach and a little more hope than she had carried in the morning. She returned to the streets, the city bustling around her. But she felt a small piece of the world had noticed her, even if only for a moment. She carried the memory of the piano with her, the feel of the keys under her fingers, the way the notes had floated through the air and found a place in people's hearts without her asking for it. Night fell, and she found a corner to rest, pulling her coat tighter and closing her eyes. The sounds of the city surrounded her, but in her mind, the music still played. She thought of the cafe, of the small act of kindness that had fed her, and of the fleeting moment when she felt seen. It was not much, but it was enough to keep her going. She had survived today, and perhaps tomorrow. Something more awaited. And so, with the city lights glowing faintly in the distance, and the memory of music in her heart, she drifted into a sleep that was deeper and more peaceful than it had been in a long time. Hunger and hardship had not vanished, but for a moment the world felt softer, kinder, and full of quiet possibility. She had played for a meal, but in doing so, she had reclaimed a piece of herself, and that was worth far more than any plate of food the next morning. The young woman woke up on a park bench, the sunlight brushing her face gently and waking her from a sleep that had been heavier than usual. She rubbed her eyes, stretched her stiff body, and tried to shake off the chill of the morning air. Hunger was back, as relentless as ever, and she knew she needed to find food soon. But for a moment, she allowed herself to remember the previous day. The way her fingers had danced over the piano keys and the small plate of food that had been placed in front of her, that memory was a comfort. A brief reminder that the world could sometimes offer kindness in unexpected ways. She wandered through the streets, her steps slow and careful, thinking about the small cafe that had fed her. Her stomach growled, reminding her that survival was always the first priority, but her mind wandered back to the piano. She remembered the way her fingers had remembered the notes almost without thought, as if they had never stopped playing in the first place. She had not realized how much she had missed music until that moment. The sound had filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of belonging, even if only fleeting, as she walked. Her mind began to drift further into memories she had long tried to forget. She remembered sitting at a grand piano in a music school years ago, fingers gliding over keys under the careful guidance of teachers who recognized her talent. She had been disciplined, dedicated, and driven by a love for the sound that could move people in ways words never could. The applause at recitals, the pride of her family, the sense of mastery, all of it seemed so distant now, almost like it belonged to someone else. Life had taken her away from that path. Responsibilities, financial struggles, and circumstances beyond her control had forced her to put her dreams aside. She had walked away from opportunities that once seemed endless, leaving only memories behind. A sound from the street brought her back to the present. A busker was playing a guitar on the corner, his case open for coins. People walked past, some glancing briefly, some ignoring him entirely. She watched silently, noting the way his fingers moved over the strings, the way he coaxed music from a simple instrument. She recognized the same passion, the same need to express something beyond words, even in someone so different from herself. It reminded her that music was not just skill, it was survival, expression, and hope. She made her way back to the cafe, hoping the owner would allow her to play again. When she arrived, she found the door slightly open and stepped inside. The man behind the counter looked up, his eyes lighting up in recognition. Without a word, he gestured toward the piano, as if inviting her to sit. Her heart thumped with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had played once for survival, but this time, it felt different. She felt a pull, not just to earn a meal, but to reconnect with a part of herself she had almost lost. Sitting at the piano, she took a moment to let her hands hover over the keys. She remembered the discipline of her past training, the exercises, the scales, and the countless hours spent perfecting her touch. It had been hard, rigorous work, and she had loved it. She had lost some of that structure over the years, but the instincts remained. Her fingers moved tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, until the music flowed like a river, smooth and unstoppable. She played pieces that told stories of longing, struggle, and hope. Each note seemed to carry a part of her soul, as if the piano itself understood her unspoken emotions as she played. She began to notice the customers paying attention. A few heads turned, conversations stopped, and some even held their breath, captivated by the unexpected beauty of her performance. She did not notice it at first, absorbed in her own memory and the joy of playing. But gradually, she sensed that something was changing in the room. People were listening, truly listening, and the music was weaving a connection between her and the strangers around her. Flashbacks continued to flood her mind as she played. She remembered her first teacher, a stern woman who had pushed her to her limits, insisting that talent without discipline was nothing. She remembered the small victories, the moments when she had mastered a particularly difficult piece, and the pride she had felt when her family applauded. And she remembered the hardships, the sudden financial struggles, the illness in the family, the constant pressure to survive that had forced her to abandon her passion. The memories were bittersweet, a mixture of joy and sorrow, but they fueled her playing. Giving it depth and authenticity, the music began to change subtly, moving from soft and reflective to powerful and passionate. Her fingers flew over the keys, each note deliberate yet filled with feeling. She lost herself completely, forgetting the hunger, the cold, and the hardships. For a moment, she was not a young woman struggling on the streets, but a musician in her prime, creating beauty that could touch hearts and change moods. The cafe became her stage, the piano, her voice, and the audience. Whether they realized it or not, her companions on a journey through sound. When she finally paused, the room was quiet. Some customers had tears in their eyes, others stared in amazement, and a few whispered softly to each other, unsure of what had just happened, but moved nonetheless. The cafe owner looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration, placing a small plate of food before her without a word. She nodded in thanks, her heart racing, not just from hunger, but from the realization that she still had something special to offer the world. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, and allowed herself to notice the glances from the people around her. They looked at her differently now, not as a young woman playing for a meal, but as someone with undeniable talent, someone whose music could command attention even without words. It was a new feeling, one that she had almost forgotten existed. She realized that her past, her training, and her experiences had not disappeared. They were part of her, waiting for the right moment to resurface. After finishing her meal, she stood and thanked the owner again. He simply nodded, and she stepped out into the streets once more, her backpack lighter, her spirit lifted. She wandered through the city, feeling the warmth of the sun and the gentle chill of the wind, carrying with her the memory of the piano, the sound of the music, and the realization that her talent was not lost. It was still there, waiting for her to claim it. Even in the most unlikely circumstances, that night she found a quiet alley to rest. wrapping herself in her coat and letting the sounds of the city lull her to sleep. She thought about the cafe, the music, and the brief connections she had made with strangers who had listened, really listened. She realized that even in her struggle, she could still touch lives, even in small ways, and that thought gave her hope. She fell asleep dreaming of melodies, imagining a future where her music might be heard beyond the cafe, beyond the streets, beyond the city she wandered. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps her journey had only just begun. The young woman woke the next morning with a sense of quiet determination. The memory of the piano, the music, and the reactions of the few who had paused to listen lingered in her mind like a soft melody. Hunger and struggle were still present, but something inside her had shifted. She felt a small flame of hope, a reminder that the world could offer moments of recognition and connection. Even if fleeting, she wandered through the streets, her feet aching, her stomach reminding her of the basic necessities she had to satisfy first. Yet she moved with a purpose that had not been there before. She thought about returning to the cafe, to sit once again at the old piano and let her music speak. Perhaps it was daring, even risky, to trust that she could play again. But she could not ignore the pull she felt toward the instrument. It was as if the piano itself had called her back, and she had no choice but to answer. When she entered the cafe, the owner greeted her with a nod, a silent acknowledgement that he remembered her. The piano stood patiently in its corner, waiting for her hands to bring it to life. She approached it, her heart beating faster than it had in weeks, and settled onto the wooden bench. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys, feeling their texture, remembering the subtle resistance and the smoothness that had once been second nature to her as she began to play. The sound flowed more confidently this time. The music was richer, deeper, and carried more emotion than before. She played pieces that told stories not just of hunger and survival, but also of her longing, her lost dreams, and her quiet resilience. The cafe, which had once seemed ordinary in background, transformed under her hands into a space filled with life and emotion. Each note was deliberate, each chord carefully constructed yet full of feeling. Among the customers that day was a man who stood out from the rest. He was older, with a calm demeanor and a watchful eye. Something about the way he carried himself suggested he had spent years observing the world, noticing details that others missed. He had wandered into the cafe to escape the noise of the streets and had found himself drawn to the sound of the piano. At first, he thought it was just pleasant background music. But as he listened, he realized it was something far more significant. He noticed the subtle control of the young woman's fingers, the precision in her timing, and the emotion that seemed to pour from her hands into the air. It was not just skill, it was artistry. He recognized that she had trained for years, that her talent was refined and disciplined. Even if life had forced her to play in small cafes for survival, there was a story behind every note, a depth that could not be taught, and he felt compelled to hear more. The young woman played without noticing his attention. Her focus was entirely on the music and the memories it evoked. She thought of her past, the years she had spent in formal training, and the moments she had been praised for her skill. Those times felt distant, but they returned to her in flashes as her fingers danced over the keys. She remembered the first recital she had performed in, the way her teacher had smiled with pride, the applause that had filled the room, the sense of accomplishment that had once defined her. Now, as she played for strangers in a small cafe, she felt that same intensity, a recognition that her talent still mattered. The man continued to listen, captivated. He had heard many musicians in his life, but there was something about her performance that was rare. It was not just the technical skill, it was the emotion, the storytelling, and the honesty of her playing. He noticed the pauses, the subtle shifts in tempo, and the way the music seemed to breathe. It was as if she had poured her life into the piano, and every hardship, every loss, every fleeting joy had been transformed into sound. Other customers began to notice too. Some looked up from their cups, some put down their books, and some simply stopped talking. The room grew quiet, and for the first time, the young woman felt the weight of attention that was not based on pity or curiosity, but genuine appreciation. Yet she did not stop or falter. The music carried her, giving her strength and reminding her of a part of herself that had been dormant for too long. When she finally paused, the room remained silent for a moment, as if holding its breath. The older man rose from his seat and approached her carefully, not wanting to startle her. His eyes held a mixture of awe and curiosity. He did not speak immediately, waiting for her to notice him on her own. When she finally looked up, he smiled gently. A rare smile that conveyed respect without words. "You play beautifully," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of experience and sincerity. "Your music, it tells a story." The young woman blushed, embarrassed by the praise. She had grown used to being unnoticed, to playing without expectation, and the sudden acknowledgement made her feel both proud and vulnerable. She nodded, unsure of what to say. She had learned long ago that words were often inadequate for expressing what music could convey. The man pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. He introduced himself simply, but there was an air of authority in his presence. He asked her about her training, her experiences, and how long she had been playing. She answered cautiously, revealing just enough to give him a sense of her journey without feeling exposed. The conversation flowed easily, as if they had both been waiting for this moment for a long time. He listened attentively, nodding as she spoke and occasionally asking questions that encouraged her to elaborate. She began to feel a sense of trust, a rare comfort that allowed her to speak freely. She told him about her past, the years of formal lessons, the sacrifices she had made, and the circumstances that had forced her to leave her dreams behind. She spoke of hunger, of hardship, and of moments of despair, but also of hope and resilience. The man did not judge or pity her. Instead, he seemed genuinely impressed by her perseverance and talent. He mentioned opportunities, subtly suggesting that there were people who would recognize and value her skill if given the chance. Her heart quickened at the idea, a mixture of excitement and fear. She had spent so long hiding her talent, playing only to survive, that the thought of being noticed for her artistry seemed almost unreal. Throughout the day, more customers began to linger, drawn by the music and the presence of the older man, whose attention seemed to signal importance. Some whispered to each other, curious about the young woman who played with such passion. She remained focused on the piano, letting the sound fill the cafe and reach beyond the walls into the street. The music was no longer just a means to earn a meal. It was a bridge between her and the world, a way to connect with people who had previously overlooked her. As the hours passed, the young woman felt a growing sense of possibility. She realized that her past, though marked by hardship, had not destroyed her talent. It had refined it, giving her music depth and authenticity that could not be replicated by someone who had only known privilege and ease. She understood that her story, her struggle, and her resilience were woven into every note she played, making her music uniquely powerful. When the cafe began to close for the evening, the man approached her once more. He offered a gentle suggestion. There were places, events, people who would appreciate her talent far beyond this small cafe. He spoke of opportunities for lessons, performances, and connections that could help her reclaim the path she had once walked. She listened intently, her mind racing with both hope and fear. The idea of stepping into a larger world, of performing for an audience that truly recognized her ability, was both thrilling and terrifying. She thanked him, her voice barely above a whisper, and left the cafe with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The streets were dark now, the city alive with lights and movement. But she felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. She walked slowly, replaying the conversation in her mind, imagining the possibilities that lay ahead. For the first time in a long while, she felt that her talent was not a secret to be hidden, but a gift to be shared, one that could open doors and change her life. That night, she found a quiet place to rest, her mind still buzzing with the events of the day. She thought about the older man, the music, and the small but meaningful connection she had made. She realized that recognition, even from a single person who understood her talent, could spark a chain of opportunities she had never dared to imagine. She fell asleep dreaming of a future where her music would not just fill the air of a cafe, but reach hearts far beyond the walls, carrying her story, her struggles, In her hope to those willing to listen, the young woman returned to the cafe the following day, a mixture of anticipation and nervousness swirling inside her. The memory of the older man who had recognized her talent lingered in her mind, and she wondered if he would come again. She felt a subtle shift within herself, a newfound sense of purpose that she had not experienced in years. She was no longer playing solely for survival. There was something more at stake now, something worth striving toward. She approached the piano cautiously, taking a moment to rest her hands on the keys and breathe deeply. The cafe was quiet in the morning, a few early customers sipping coffee and reading newspapers. She let her fingers move gently, testing the keys, feeling the familiar resistance and weight beneath her touch. As she played, memories of her past training surfaced, reminding her of the control and precision she had once mastered. The music began softly, tentative, as if the piano itself was warming up with her. Gradually, the sound grew stronger, more confident. She played with a sense of storytelling, letting the music convey her emotions, her history, and her hopes for the future. Each note seemed to float in the air, capturing attention despite the quiet murmurs and clinking cups. Customers who had initially ignored her began to glance up, drawn by the depth and feeling of her performance. It was no longer background noise. It was an experience, something that demanded to be heard. As she continued, the older man entered the cafe, taking a seat in his usual spot. His presence was comforting, a silent reassurance that someone truly understood her gift. He listened intently, nodding subtly as her fingers danced across the keys. There was no need for applause or praise. His focus alone validated her talent. But as she played, she began to notice other customers stopping to listen as well. Conversations faded, laptops were closed, and eyes turned toward the piano. The music had captured their attention, and they were fully present in the moment, encouraged by the growing awareness around her. She allowed herself to play more freely, letting the music flow without restraint. The pieces she chose were emotionally charged, reflecting both her struggles and the resilience she had developed over the years. There were moments of softness and reflection, followed by powerful crescendos that filled the room with energy and emotion. Each chord and note seemed to tell a story that words could never fully capture, drawing the audience deeper into her world. A young couple sitting near the back whispered to each other, astonished at the skill and emotion in her playing. An older man who had initially appeared disinterested found himself leaning forward, his eyes fixed on her hands as they moved effortlessly across the keys. Even the cafe staff paused in their work, unable to ignore the captivating sound that filled the room. It was a rare moment when music transcended barriers. Connecting strangers through the universal language of feeling, the young woman remained focused on the piano, unaware of the growing crowd. She played as she always had, with sincerity and passion, yet this time there was a subtle difference. She felt the energy of the audience, their silent appreciation, and it fueled her performance. She began to improvise slightly, letting her emotions guide her, creating small variations that made the music unique and alive. The room seemed to hold its breath, attuned to every subtle shift in tempo and intensity. A child near the front stopped eating their pastry, captivated by the sound. Their wide eyes followed her hands as they moved with both grace and determination. Parents glanced at the child, then at the piano, realizing that something extraordinary was unfolding. The music had broken through the ordinary routines of the cafe, transforming the space into something magical. Strangers who had never met were now sharing a moment of awe, connected by the skill and heart of the young woman at the piano. The older man's expression reflected both pride and admiration. He had seen many musicians, but there was something about her that was rare, a combination of technical mastery and emotional honesty. He recognized that she was not playing for recognition, fame, or reward. She was playing from a place of authenticity, a deep connection to her own experiences and feelings. That honesty made the music resonate in a way that touched everyone present, as the final notes lingered in the air. The cafe remained silent for a moment, as if holding its breath. Then, slowly, the room erupted in applause. It was not loud or overwhelming, but it was sincere and heartfelt, a recognition of something special. The young woman looked up, startled by the response. She had been lost in the music, unaware of how fully she had captured the attention of those around her. Her heart swelled with a mixture of pride, gratitude, and a hint of disbelief. For the first time, she realized that her talent had the power to move people, to make them stop, listen, and feel. The older man approached her as the applause settled, his eyes shining with respect. "Your music. It speaks," he said quietly. "You have a gift that cannot be ignored. It is more than skill, it is heart, soul, and story combined." She felt a lump in her throat, overwhelmed by the sincerity of his words. She had spent so long hiding her talent, playing only to survive, that hearing someone acknowledge it in this way was almost surreal. She nodded, unable to find words that felt adequate. The experience was larger than she had expected. A reminder that music was not just about notes on a page, but about connection, emotion, and the ability to touch lives. Other customers approached her as well, offering smiles, words of encouragement, and simple compliments. Each interaction reinforced the realization that she was no longer invisible. Her music had reached people in a profound way, creating an impact far beyond what she had imagined possible. The cafe, once just a place to earn a meal, had become a stage for expression and recognition. The young woman felt a sense of empowerment, knowing that she could create this effect not just occasionally, but consistently if given the opportunity. That afternoon, the cafe owner approached her with a warm smile. "I've never seen anything like that," he said. "You don't just play, you change the room. You make people feel." He offered her a permanent place to perform whenever she wanted, ensuring that she would have both food and a chance to share her music regularly. She accepted gratefully, recognizing that this small opportunity could be a stepping stone to something greater as she left the cafe later that day. She walked through the bustling streets with a new sense of confidence. The city seemed different somehow, filled with possibility rather than only hardship. She thought about the people she had touched, the connections she had made, and the knowledge that her music could open doors she had once thought closed forever. It was a powerful feeling, one that reminded her that talent, when nurtured and shared, could transform not only her own life, but the lives of those who heard it. That night, as she settled into her quiet corner for rest, she replayed the events of the day in her mind. She thought of the applause, the smiles, the whispered compliments, and the sense of belonging she had felt for the first time in years. She realized that her journey was changing, that her music had a purpose beyond survival. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could play freely, be recognized, and touch hearts on a larger scale. And with that thought, she drifted into sleep, comforted by the knowledge that her gift had the power to be seen, heard, and felt. The young woman arrived at the cafe that morning with a sense of calm excitement. Over the past few days, she had discovered not only the power of her music, but also a newfound confidence in herself. She had realized that her talent was not something to hide, but a gift to share. And each time she sat at the piano, she felt a quiet thrill knowing that people were listening, truly listening. Today felt different, though. Today she felt a sense that something important might happen. Though she could not put it into words, she approached the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the familiar texture beneath her touch. The cafe was busier than usual, with more customers than she had seen before. Some came to work or read, but others paused at the door, drawn by the promise of music, either from word of mouth or simply curiosity. As she began to play, the room grew quiet, every sound except the piano fading into the background. She played with a level of focus and emotion that seemed almost effortless, as if the music had become a part of her breath and heartbeat. Her fingers moved with precision and feeling, telling stories of hardship, perseverance, and hope. The melodies were rich and complex, yet every note felt accessible, reaching directly into the hearts of the listeners. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Some leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the flow of sound that seemed to bring the room to life. She noticed subtle movements, a hand resting on a cup, a head nodding slightly, a smile forming on a face previously lost in thought. She felt connected to everyone in that space, though they were strangers. For the first time, She realized that her music could not only convey her story, but could also create an invisible bond between people. The older man who had first recognized her talent was there again. Sitting in his usual spot with a quiet intensity, he listened without interruption, his eyes tracking her fingers as they danced across the keys. Occasionally, he would nod subtly, acknowledging the skill and emotion in her playing. She felt reassured by his presence, as if he was a silent guide, encouraging her to fully embrace her potential. As she continued, the crowd grew larger. Regular customers were joined by new faces, some stopping in from the street to witness the young woman whose music had begun to attract attention. Whispers circulated about her skill, and soon, the cafe was filled with people drawn not by hunger or coffee, but by the need to hear the extraordinary music emanating from the corner piano. The young woman, immersed in her playing, began to notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The music had taken on a life of its own, and the room seemed to respond in turn. People were no longer mere listeners. They were participants, reacting to every rise and fall in the melody. There was a child sitting cross-legged on the floor, wide-eyed, absorbing every note, and a woman in the back quietly wiping tears from her cheeks. Each person was experiencing the music in their own way, yet together they formed a silent audience that acknowledged her talent without interruption or distraction. She played with a sense of freedom she had not felt in years, improvising slightly, letting her emotions guide the music. She thought of the struggles she had faced, the long days and nights of hunger and hardship, and the moments when she had almost given up. Each of those memories became part of her performance, giving it authenticity and depth. She realized that her past, painful as it had been, had shaped her music into something uniquely powerful. Every challenge she had faced now added richness to her sound, making it resonate on a level beyond technical skill. The older man approached her as the piece drew to a close, his face illuminated with a rare expression of awe. He spoke softly, but his words carried weight. "You have touched everyone here today," he said. "This is not just talent. This is a gift. Your music has the power to move people in ways words cannot. You must never underestimate that." She felt a wave of emotion, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and disbelief. For years, she had played to survive, to earn her next meal, often believing that her talent would go unnoticed. And now, here it was, recognized, respected, and valued. She nodded quietly, unable to find words that seemed adequate. The realization that her life could change because of her music was both exciting and terrifying. Other patrons approached her, offering compliments and encouragement. A few expressed interest in hearing her perform again, suggesting that her music deserved a wider audience. The young woman listened, absorbing the reactions without arrogance or vanity. She understood that this was a turning point, a moment where her life could shift from mere survival to one of opportunity and purpose. In the days that followed, she returned to the cafe regularly. Each performance drew more attention, and word began to spread beyond the small neighborhood. She received invitations to play at events, gatherings, and even small concerts. With each opportunity, her confidence grew, and she began to see a future that had seemed impossible only weeks ago. She realized that the gift she had once taken for granted, the music she had abandoned out of necessity, could now shape her destiny. But more than recognition or opportunity, she discovered something even deeper, a sense of self-worth and identity. She understood that her talent was not merely a tool for survival. It was an expression of her soul, a reflection of her resilience and humanity. Playing the piano was no longer about feeding herself or earning approval. It was about connecting with others, sharing a part of herself, and inspiring those who listened. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, the cafe owner approached her with a proposal. He wanted to help her establish a regular schedule, ensuring that she had a platform to share her music consistently. He also encouraged her to seek out mentors, teachers, and opportunities beyond the cafe, recognizing that her talent deserved to be nurtured and expanded. She accepted gratefully, realizing that she could no longer play in isolation or secrecy. Her music had the power to touch lives. It was her responsibility to share it. As weeks turned into months, her life began to change in ways she had never imagined. She played at local events, was invited to perform for community gatherings, slowly built a reputation as a gifted pianist whose music carried emotion and story. The older man remained a guiding presence, offering advice, encouragement, and occasional mentorship, helping her navigate opportunities and challenges. Through it all, she remained humble, remembering the cafe where it all began, and the small steps that had led her to this point. Eventually, she was offered a chance to perform at a larger venue, a concert hall where her music could reach an even wider audience. She felt nervous, aware of the stakes, but also empowered. She had come a long way from playing for a meal, from the uncertainty and struggle that had once defined her days. Now she was playing for connection, for expression, and for the joy of sharing her gift with the world. The night of her first major performance, she sat at the grand piano on a brightly lit stage. Feeling the weight of anticipation and excitement, the audience waited in silence, their attention focused entirely on her. She took a deep breath, remembering every moment that had brought her here at the hunger. The cold streets, the small cafe, the recognition, and the belief that her music could matter. And then she played. Every note carried her story, every chord expressed her journey, and the music resonated through the hall, touching hearts and minds alike. When the final note faded, the audience erupted into applause, cheers, and standing ovations. Tears filled her eyes, not from exhaustion or relief, but from the overwhelming sense of fulfillment and validation. She had played for a meal once, and now she was playing for something far greater, the recognition of her talent, the connection with others, and the realization that her music had the power to change lives, including her own, as she left the stage. She felt a quiet pride and deep gratitude. She knew that her journey was far from over, that there would be challenges ahead. But she also knew that she had found her place in the world. Her talent, once hidden and unappreciated, had been recognized, nurtured, and celebrated. She had transformed from a young woman playing for survival into an artist who could touch hearts, inspire others, and claim her rightful place in the world of music. And so, she continued to play, not just for herself or for recognition, but for the sheer love of music and the power it had to connect people, to heal, and to bring joy. The girl who once played for a simple meal had become a musician whose story, expressed through every note and chord, would be remembered, celebrated, and cherished for years to come.